If there is one video game franchise that your grandmother is familiar with, it's probably Tetris. The ubiquitous puzzle game by Alexei Pajitnov is one of the best-selling video game series ever made. With so many ports, it would be redundant for me to list off more than 5 of them off of the dome. Tetris is a classic, and it's one of my favorite puzzle games ever, right next to Panel de Pon and Dr. Mario. But there is one Tetris game that has eluded many players, a title that remained obfuscated in the annals of video game history until relatively recently. Tetris CD-i is a port of Tetris for the Philips CD-i, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. The Philips CD-i was an optical disc-based video game console, and I'm using those words very liberally here, released by the Philips company in 1990. Yeah, you know Philips, the guys that make those light bulbs and shit. Anyways, the CD-i was an abject failure in terms of the sales and critical reception. It was essentially an overpriced CD player that was erroneously marketed as something of an all-in-one media center to trump all other video game consoles and home computers at the time. It, as a matter of fact, did not do that. I feel really empathetic towards any game developers who had to attempt to code, design, or create video games on the CD-i. Calling it a video game console is a disservice to the video game medium, and a lot of the titles released for it were usually interactive point-and-click titles or full-motion video-based games. I know it sounds like I'm really going for the jugular here, but honestly, when the Atari Jaguar and Panasonic 3DO have a better lineup of software, you know your entire straight. The CD-i is best known for its lineup of licensed Nintendo titles, such as Hotel Mario or Link: The Faces of Evil. These games would have also been relegated to obscurity if it weren't for their popularity in the mid to late 2000s due to the excellent YouTube poop material that these games provided.
I hope you made lots of spaghetti.
Luigi, look! It's from Bowser!
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy, this piece is what all true warriors strive for.
And honestly, I see this as a positive. If there is one good thing to come from the CDI's legacy, it would be YouTube poops. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in a world without Gay Luigi or King Harkinian's Dinner Blaster.
Dinner
Blaster.
But believe it or not, there are a couple of decent titles for the CDI, and one of these titles is the aforementioned Tetris CD-i. Released in 1992, Tetris CD-i is, on the surface, your conventional standard Tetris fare. This is your basic vanilla flavor to Tetris. The pieces cannot be held onto, and there are no shadows to indicate where your pieces are about to fall. And to my discretion, there isn't even any multiplayer versus functionality. For complete transparency, for this video's sake, I've actually never played Tetris CD-i. The Philips CD-i is an expensive console to collect for, and emulation software for the CD-i is fickle and rather unwieldy. While I haven't played the game itself, I have been more than acquainted with the game's soundtrack. It's been in regular rotation in my headphones for the better half of over a decade now. Produced and arranged by Jim Andren, Tetris CD-i soundtrack is an assortment of electronic lounge, elevator, and new wave tracks. It's heavily reminiscent of the type of muzak songs that you would hear in a mall or a supermarket towards the tail end of the 20th century. The music in Tetris CD-i was programmed and sequenced on keyboards. Well, actually, there were technically no keyboards involved. You see, Jim Andren used a Yamaha TG77 and Roland JV1010 rack mount to provide the soundscapes for the soundtrack. A rack mount is essentially a keyboard but without the keys to play it on. He then used these rack mounts to produce the music in a DAW, that DAW specifically being Digital Performer. DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and it's any software that allows you to produce music, such as FL Studio or Ableton, or digital performer. I can assume he hooked these rack mounts up to his computer to program the music in digital performer. Fun fact, this DAW has also been used by Jun Shikuma, the woman behind most of the Bomberman music, and another one of my favorite video game composers. I swear, the soundtrack to Tetris CD-i is a time capsule to some 1980s grocery store. I often find myself putting the soundtrack on in my headphones whenever I'm out and about and doing errands. If you'll allow me, let's briefly cover some of my favorite tracks, just to give you a little taste of this game's soundtrack. Level 0 is this mysterious, almost foreboding sounding track. It's my favorite song in this game, full stop, and for good reason. It's absolutely stellar. It sounds like you're watching the sun set upon a beach while sitting in the sand as the warm waves occasionally sweep over you. If I'm ever stressed out or I need something to calm my nerves, usually this track is my go-to. It's incredible. Level 1 is this relaxing, dulcet song that reminds me of my childhood for some reason, even though I never played this game as a kid. The shaker and hi-hats shimmy back and forth in the mix, and the snare sounds distant and reverberant, and that droning, sweeping bass completely washes over me. It makes me want to drift off to sleep. Level 4 sounds like I'm in the midst of solving some sort of puzzle, and I'm on the precipice of coming to a brilliant deduction. The horns are triumphant and emphatic, while the percussion kicks up after the first 16 bars. The song continues to crescendo, only to bring the energy back down towards the end. Level 6 is a sauntering waltz in 6/8 time. It sounds light, delicate, and cold, while also simultaneously remaining warm and inviting. To me, this song sounds like a snowed-in home on Christmas Day. As the fire pit inside burns warm, so do the synthetic orchestral strings on this track. And I'm particularly fond of the piano tone that the Yamaha MIDI provides. The irony here is that, while I ultimately get Christmassy vibes from this track, the level itself takes place on a beach. And finally, my second favorite track in this game, the high score theme. Mysterious, foreign, while elegant sounding. This song embodies what I would imagine the average American's perception of the Soviet Union was like in the 90s. It sounds militaristic, formal, and regal, with the slightest hint of mysticism. Almost as if this game's addicting nature itself is a mystical Russian spell, enchanting the player to continue playing. Listening to these songs in retrospect, many of the tracks here on the Tetris CD-i score sound like modern vaporwave tunes. A lot of perennial vaporwave songs are chopped and screwed samples of 1980s new wave, fusion, electronic, and jazz tracks. One of the most eminent vaporwave songs is Macintosh Plus's 420 off of their album Floral Shop. This track transposes the Diana Ross song It's Your Move, while chopping it up and occasionally stutter looping the sample to recontextualize and transform the original song into something entirely unique. As an aside, give Floral Shop a listen. It's a spectacular record, and Vectroid, aka Macintosh Plus, crafted an insane soundscape out of the samples. It's more than the sum of its parts, and it is far more creative than just slowing the BPM of the samples down, like so many people reductively claim it is. In addition to the fantastic soundtrack, Tetris CD-i comes correct with very cozy visuals as well. The game depicts the Tetris piece as some sort of monolith, not unlike that of 2001: A Space Odyssey. This monolith is overlaid atop a serene full-motion video for the player to immerse themselves in. Each level takes place within different natural biomes, such as a desert, or a prairie, or a mountain range. This has got to be the chillest, coziest version of any port of Tetris. It's quite impressive how a puzzle game about dropping cold, sterile geometric shapes down a chamber can be this inviting and serene. The dithering and artifacting of the full-motion video makes the visuals even more hypnagogic and surreal. While this has got to be one of the worst-selling ports of Tetris due to the commercial failure of the CDI, the soundtrack itself has developed something of a cult following recently in the age of the internet, and it seems like Jim Andron is very well aware of that following too, as he's commented on a couple of re-uploads of the soundtrack to YouTube. That being said, I would love for someone to port this game to PC so I could actually play it. Maybe tighten up the controls a little bit. I've heard this version of Tetris doesn't actually play super well. And hell, if the CDI Zelda games can get a modern fan port, so can Tetris CD-i. At the end of the day, I'm just grateful that this game hasn't been completely obscured by the sands of time, and I highly recommend you give the soundtrack a listen for yourself. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic rest of your day.